it up.
Oh, no, we can leave it there.
Okay.
Told you to walk away. That was my first and last mistake. I'm blue without your face. But what can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a pair of lips that I've lost in the moment. All I want is for you to come back. Now I'm caught in the middle of life, and I need.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, Rashid, and it's an honor for me to bring to you guys. I'm an architect, Richard Gage. He's been working for years and years about 911 Truth. He put together the founders. He was the founder of Architects and Engineers for 911 Truth, and I've been wanting to get this guy on the show for the longest. So thank you so much for joining us today on this platform.
You're so welcome. It's my honor, Rashid. Thanks for having me.
So now, listen, the stage is yours. I'm about to put back on the your information, and the stage is yours. You can tell people what you want, because my thing is, I've always wondered, how could planes disappear in a building with no wreckage, and then they can identify DNA samples of bones of people, but metal remains, and then conveniently paper IDs or passports were found on the building or in the buildings, and it never made sense to me. So before I put that up there, could you explain that to me? Because maybe I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but it doesn't seem physically possible for that.
Well, there was a lot of paper on the ground, and not all of it burned up in the fireball. So, I've got a lot of irrefutable, overwhelming scientific forensic evidence to share with your audience. And I don't put the passports in there for that reason, because there was a lot of unburned paper. Now, probably none of it came from the plane. And I don't think there were hijackers on the plane anyway. So I'm in agreement with you about that. But I don't use the passport for talking points, because, people have different thoughts about that.
Okay.
But they don't have different thoughts about Building 7.
Right.
The third worst failure in modern history. Everybody gets that. A fifth grader can understand the information we're going to be presenting to your supporters today.
Okay. Well, the floor is yours. I'm going to mute my microphone, and I'm going to let you take it.
Well, okay, then. And just be prepared, people. This information, while easy to understand, it does not take an architect, an engineer, a scientist, or a physicist to understand this stuff. You'll get it. The problem is digesting the implications of this, which implies one of the biggest conspiracies imaginable, one that all of the media promoted the march to war after this false flag operation. Our treasuries have been robbed. $6.5 trillion global war on terror. We've invaded 2 countries in which over 1 million people have been killed. We are, as a result of 9/11, our phone calls, emails, texts are systematically swept up and stored in the largest building in Utah for use against us. Any of us, because of the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, any of us can be arrested without a right to a lawyer, a trial, a jury. All because of 9/11. That is completely unconstitutional, of course, but because of this emergency, this attack on our cultural institutions, economic buildings, the Twin Towers, because so many people from so many nationalities died because the Pentagon was attacked, thus declaring an act of war, invoking Article 5 of NATO, so the coalition of the forced could go and invade many countries, many more than just Afghanistan and Iraq. We'll talk about that. But we were lied to by Congress, by the 9/11 Commission, by the President of the United States, and every member of Congress and the President since then. Lied to on a massive scale. The world was lied to and scammed. And that's where I drew the line. I mean, in 2006, I heard this information on the radio from David Ray Griffin, and I was just shocked. I had to pull my van over in the parking lot of the gymnasium at Akalani's High School and just listen to David Ray Griffin being interviewed by Bonnie Faulkner of Guns and Butter program. And I was just shocked to hear this information. It's the first time I ever heard any alternative theory as to how these towers came down. I took the information. I went to see David Ray Griffin that night at the Oakland Grand Lake Theater. There were 600 people there. I couldn't even get in. It was sold out. So I had to go home and watch the live stream. I didn't even know what a live stream was, but I figured it out. And lo and behold, everything I was hearing, the dots began to connect, and I got real angry. I mean, really angry that I had been scammed. I felt like I was, just born here. I was so naive. My awareness increased. And of course, since then, I've become aware of many other false flag operations where one country attacks itself to go to war with another country by manipulating their people to support such a war. And that's what happened, exactly what happened with every war we've been into, including Afghanistan and Iraq. So this is a big deal. And I just want people to take courage as we go into it, because it's going to hit you like it did me. Some of you are already aware, like Rashid, who's been down these rabbit holes for a long time. So many don't even know there was a third tower that came down on 9/11. I'm one of 90,000 architects in the American Institute of Architects. We didn't get one bulletin on this, the third worst structural failure in modern history. It's been swept under the rug. It should have been the most studied structural failure ever. After all, no plane hit this building. This is a 47-story skyscraper, easily the tallest building in most of our states, but it's dwarfed next to the tallest buildings in the world at the time they were built in 73. But this is no small building. Each floor was an acre in size. That's true for the Twin Towers too. But it's about a football field in length north of the tower, part of the World Trade Center complex. And it did suffer a little bit of damage when the towers came down that morning. But NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who was tasked by Congress to explain these collapses to the American people, all three of them, said, with Building 7, it wasn't the damage. I'll show you that damage in a minute. Well, let's look at the collapse of this building. The east penthouse in the upper left comes down first in an isolated event. And then, as if by magic, the entire building does this 6 seconds later, straight down, uniformly, symmetrically into its own footprint at free fall acceleration. We'll walk through those features, but I wanted to show you that. And I wanted to show you how NIST explained that.
What we found was that uncontrolled building fires caused an extraordinary event. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fire.
Primarily due to fires. Okay, well, we should look at those fires. Here they are. These are the only fires that we had in this building. They are few, they are small, and they are scattered throughout the building. And those fires are burnt out on the 12th floor, which is where NIST said the initiation of collapse began by thermal expansion, requiring thermal expansion just immediately leading up to and during the collapse of this building. Long span beams pushed a girder, this girder, off of its seat on this column 79. And then they say floor 13 fell on 12, 12 on 11, and so on for 9 floors. When the entire vertical instability went all the way up to the roof and then traveled laterally across this football field sized building in 6 seconds. It's ludicrous. But look, the fires are burnt out on that floor. That's what the photos and videos show us. But they maintain through their fire simulation a work of fraudulence. Is that a word? and on their part, and they obviously there's no fires on that floor anymore. So over an hour before the collapse. But their collapse requires fires to be on that floor, thermally expanding those beams, pushing that girder off of its seat on those columns. So we can see right off the bat that NIST is lying. Well, not only that, but they've got a tough sell job to do because no steel frame, fire protected structure, which is what Building 7 is, has ever collapsed due to fire, ever in the history of steel frame fire protected buildings. And there's been dozens and dozens of much hotter, larger, and longer lasting fires in these buildings, as you can see here. And even after 9/11, fully engulfed, there's been a dozen of these type of fires after 9/11, including very recently in China. So why did Building 7 come down? Nobody buys the fire routine. They didn't buy it when NIST announced it. And 7 years after 9/11, their final report came out. 7 years. They've been fumbling that football. And nobody, well, some people bought it, but nobody who's thinking bought it. Nobody who's privy to the information we're looking at today buys it, that's for sure. And let's compare. See what might have brought this building down, because we have controlled demolitions like the old hotels in Las Vegas, like on the left, a series of known controlled demolitions. On the right, Building 7. Is there any similarity? Is there enough similarity to warrant at least an investigation into the possible use of explosives? Especially since fire, the official cause of this building's collapse, has never in history brought down a steel frame fire protected structure ever. It should have been the first hypothesis that NIST considered, because that's Occam's razor, right? An unprecedented event. It looks like a controlled demolition. Gosh, maybe we should investigate that. But they relegated that to a series of very frequently asked questions and put on their website 11 years later. Well, let's look at the features of controlled demolition and see if Building 7 has any of them. Starting with the first feature. Is there a sudden onset of destruction? Well, let's watch as we listen to CBS Dan Rather explain his view that evening of this collapse.
And what you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape.
Are you hearing this?
Itself. Okay. Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down? Well, there's Dan using his common sense, right? We've all seen the old hotels in Las Vegas. That's exactly what it looks like. But he's never repeated that after 9/11. In fact, we've never seen this building come down, with two exceptions, on mainstream television. It's been swept under the rug. And like I said, architects and engineers weren't even notified about this. It wasn't studied. Why, for the first time in history, did we lose a steel frame fire protected structure? Feature number 2, is there a straight down symmetrical collapse into the building's footprint? Well, let's look from West Street. Pretty straight down, pretty symmetrical. How do we get that to happen in any high-rise building? That is incredible. Well, you have to take out all the core columns first, and then followed within a fraction of a second of each other, all the core columns, and then followed about a second later by the perimeter columns. Any deviation in that pattern, you've got real problems. So the question is, can these fires cause that level? Do they have that level of precision? No, they don't. If you here's what can happen if you don't get those explosives going off just right. Building go terribly wrong. Controlled demolition. Somebody has to go back into that building and fix those charges that didn't go off. Not going to be me. So the question is also, if the damage started in the northeast corner, which is down here, and wouldn't we expect the building under this theory of collapse initiation with a progressive collapse from the 13th floor on down in this corner, wouldn't that cause the building to tip over toward the damaged side, the left side in this case? Yeah, well, we would expect that. Well, why did it go straight down then? Buildings that are damaged on one side fall to that side. That's just natural. That's common sense. And you don't want to be in this building when that happens either. So how fast is this building coming down? Well, let's look at feature number 4. It's coming down at free fall acceleration. Wait a minute. That's as fast as a bowling ball falling from the sky, gaining velocity every second, the definition of acceleration. There's no resistance under the bowling ball. The building, this one, had 40,000 tons of structural steel supporting it that were 3 to 5 times stronger than it needed to be to support this building. Where did all that steel go all of a sudden so that building could fall as fast as a bowling ball? No answers from NIST on that, though they were forced and publicly embarrassed in a press conference on August 26th to fix their report because they'd been previously denying free fall. In fact, Sham Sunder said, if that were free fall, that would mean there'd be no structure underneath. Duh. Well, what happened to the structure when you finally were forced to admit free fall? They don't acknowledge that. They just quietly put it in the report like this without any acknowledgement of how that possibly could have happened by fire. Where did all those columns go at once? Because that pattern has to be repeated floor by floor. Well, we don't think these fires were responsible. Forgive us, but we're using our common sense also. Feature number 5 is, do we have the total dismemberment of the steel frame? Well, yeah. We had a 47-story moment resisting steel frame building that's collapsed like a house of cards into a pile 6 stories tall. And maybe, depending on where you look at it, 4 stories, maybe 3 stories, whatever. It should have been 20 stories tall if this was any kind of a natural collapse, and it wouldn't have come down like a house of cards into a haystack pile in the center of the footprint. Buildings that fall naturally due to unplanned events, they fall over to the path of least resistance. Their columns and beams are not all severed one from another. The concrete is not pulverized to a fine powder. We recognize a building as a building, as opposed to a house of cards. Can these fires cause what happened to Building 7? Not even. So what are we looking for? We're looking for clues. Like if there were explosions, there'd be sounds of explosions that are heard by witnesses. NIST says there were no explosions. Well, they said they interviewed over 100 first responders and many, 1,000 other people. But they must have missed all of these witnesses. Here's Daryl, a medical student, interviewed that evening.
We were across from the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and you know, we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was well, it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and you know, it was horrifying. And then you know, about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground. You know.
Wow, a sound of a clap of thunder, a shockwave ripping through the building, the windows busting out, and then the building coming down. That is a pretty clear order of events. Listen to Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic.
You heard explosions, like boom. It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when in compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
And Bill Rosati, what did he see?
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere, chaotic like.
Well, that's helpful. We also have Barry Jennings, who, along with Michael Hess, the attorney for Giuliani, were called to a meeting in the building because the Emergency Operations Center was on the 23rd floor. Well, they were late to that meeting, and the entire building had been evacuated after the first plane hit the tower. And the second plane hit the tower while they were in the building, and they were told to get out of there because they made it up to the 23rd floor. And on their way down, they're hearing all of these explosions here.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor, I heard some more explosions. You know,
what's the sound?
Like a boom, like an explosion.
And more than one?
Yes. We started walking down the stairs, we made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion, blew us back into the 8th floor. When we get outside, a police officer comes to me and says, you have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run.
Information of bombs? Bombs like this heard in the late morning of 9/11 in the vicinity of Building 7?
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
You
gotta get back from here. You know that, you gotta get back. All right? Don't worry about me. You need to make calls right now.
Okay, so NIST says none of those witnesses of explosions exist at Building 7, and there's more. And we have to look at the experts, like Kamal Obaid of the UC Berkeley with a master's and his private engineering practice. A localized failure in a steel frame building like World Trade Center 7 cannot cause a catastrophic collapse like a house of cards without a simultaneous and patterned loss of several of its columns at key locations within the building. Well, there's more than 36 structural engineers signed on to the petition demanding a new investigation among the 3,600 architects and engineers. Well, that impressed structural engineer, forensic engineer Leroy Hulsey, one of the top forensic structural engineers in the country, chair of the Civil Engineering Department at University of Alaska, who got his two teams together competing with each other on this dynamic analysis of Building 7 using Abacus and SAP 2000, and they indeed corroborated each other. And they found that, if column 79 failed, and 80 and 81, as NIST suggested, the building would have tipped over. That stands to reason. And we're talking about in the lower right corner, which is the northeast corner. So they found, what do we have to do to get this building to behave the way the video did in the center? Well, we had to take out all the columns in the building, floor by floor. Otherwise, the building would have tipped over. Compare that to NIST's computer model, where they stop it after 2 seconds into the global collapse because it begins to tip over. Their own computer model, which they had 7 years to back engineer, removing 400 structural steel connections every second in order to try to get it to fall at free fall. But for some reason, they couldn't even do that. So their own computer model disproves their theories. What are the findings of the University of Alaska? Fire didn't cause the collapse of this building. Temperatures were not high enough to cause the weakening of the steel framing. Thermal expansion did not result in a loss of support for the beams and girders. The collapse of this building was a global failure involving what? The near simultaneous failure of all the columns in the building, not a progressive collapse, as claimed by NIST. Well, this report has been given to every member of Congress with no results. It's as if they do not want to know. They can't afford to know. It's a third rail. They'll be called a conspiracy theorist, like Senator Ron Johnson, who has finally come out in favor of a real investigation. We'll talk about him. But let's first look and see what might have really brought this building down, because the University of Alaska did not speculate or look at the evidence of what brought the building down. They just wanted to verify if what NIST was saying was true or not. And it wasn't. And so we look at the evidence of extreme heat provided by who? FEMA, in their Appendix C of the May of 2002 Building Performance Assessment Team report. This is the report that came out before the NIST report. In this appendix, they do a metallurgical examination. In the metallurgical examination, they find what? Never before observed in building fires. Eutectic reactions causing intergranular melting. Now, wait a minute. Melting of steel capable of turning a solid steel girder into Swiss cheese, like you see in the end of the beam from World Trade Center 7. This does not happen by office fires, the official cause of this building's collapse. Steel doesn't melt until you get 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. and then it's pouring. Well, where are we getting those temperatures from? No plane hit this building, and it wasn't jet fuel, and jet fuel only burns, as we'll see, about 650 degrees Fahrenheit, less than a quarter of the temperatures. That's in open air burning. Less than a quarter of the temperatures required to do this to steel, which is one of the Twin Towers steel beams, thinned to razor sharpness from 5/8 inch thick. How does this happen? They document rapid oxidation and sulfidation, which doesn't happen by fires either, with melting subsequently. Liquid iron, that's molten iron. That's not even steel. Where is the iron coming from? And how did it get molten? We haven't used iron in our skyscrapers for 100 years. So where's the iron coming from? Where's the sulfur coming from? Sulfur formed during this hot corrosion attack on the steel is called perhaps the deepest mystery uncovered in the investigation by the New York Times, and yet it's completely omitted from the NIST report when they came in and took over the investigation in 2002. The presence of sulfur indicating possible demolition here. But NIST says, oh no, the sulfur must have come from the calcium sulfate in the gypsum board. Well, gypsum board has been used for 100 years to protect steel from fire. It's never turned around and attacked the steel that it's designed to protect. No, we'll find out where it came from. But fire protection engineer Jonathan Barnett says steel members in the debris pile appear to have been partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures. Well, there's a problem here. It takes 4,000 degrees to evaporate steel. So now we're at 4,000 degrees with metal molten metal pouring out of the crab claw excavator from World Trade Center cleanup. We can tell the temperature of the material by its color because of the emissivity. We're exceeding 2,500 degrees here, more than 3 times what are likely the temperature of these fires, and easily twice the claimed temperature by NIST. Nothing in the official narrative can explain this extreme heat. We've looked and we've looked. Fires, in their worst case, experimental for testing purposes, worst case, conservative fires, 1,830 degrees. Some people say jet fuel can burn that hot. Even if it can, which its own literature says that it burns only 600 degrees in open air, it can't explain the temperatures we're talking about, 3, 4, and 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. What can? Can thermite? What is thermite anyway?
An incendiary used by the military, thermite is a compound of iron oxide and aluminum, which when ignited sustains an extreme heat reaction, creating molten iron. In just 2 seconds, thermite can reach temperatures over 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, quite enough to liquefy steel. We know that open-air fires cannot burn hot enough to melt steel, but metal had melted at the base of the towers. Appendix C of the FEMA report describes sulfur residues on the World Trade Center steel. The New York Times called this the deepest mystery of all. Sulfur slightly lowers the melting point of iron, and iron oxide and iron sulfide had formed on the surface of the structural steel. Sulfur used with thermite is called thermate, producing even faster results.
Maybe we're getting somewhere here, because if thermite were used, it would explain the presence of sulfur, because that's what's added to thermite to become thermate and make it much more effective at cutting through steel. Would also explain the 4,000 degree temperatures that are documented all over the place. And it would also explain the presence of other ignited incendiaries in the dust, which are previously molten iron microspheres found by the U.S. Geological Survey and R.J. Lee Group and the EPA. And the USGS documents this in 2005, Particle Atlas of the World Trade Center dust. Where do we get previously molten, meaning 3,000 degrees minimum, iron, meaning the byproduct of thermite, as we'll see, microspheres? How do they get spherical? Well, we'll find out in a minute. But the EPA called these a signature component to distinguish the World Trade Center dust from common office building dust. In other words, it's not even World Trade Center dust unless it has all these previously molten iron microspheres. Well, they comprise up to 6% of the dust samples. There's billions and billions and billions of them, up to 4 tons of them all together by extrapolation based on how much you find from what dust samples, etc. The R.J. Lee Group finds them and they say, hey, these are formed, we don't know what they are either, but they're formed during the event, not before by the welders putting the building together, not afterward by the iron workers cutting the building apart, but during the event. So they document them too. Well, where could they come from? Let's do an experiment and find out. Experiment is the arbiter of competing hypotheses. Let's do one that NIST did not do. Let's light some thermite. Looks like thousands of sparks, but they cool and they fall into the pan as previously molten, now solid, iron, the byproduct of thermite, microspheres fascinating. How do they get spherical? Well, that's what aerosolized liquids do when they're, because of the surface tension, forms them into droplets that are spherical. And so all of that was evidence of ignited thermite and can only be that. Is there any evidence of unignited thermite in the World Trade Center dust? Yeah. A team of 8 international scientists led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen and Stephen Jones in the US analyze several independently collected samples. And you can see that one of them is found way over on the on-ramp to the Brooklyn Bridge. So it was not contaminated with cleanup results from the World Trade Center way over here. Well, those samples all had these curious red-gray chips, red on one side, gray on the other. So they were fluid applied because they're dual layered. They go, okay, well, this is just paint. No, it's not. Paint is not attracted by a magnet. And so these have a high ferromagnetic attraction. And so they get real curious and they do X-ray energy dispersive spectroscopy on that red layer on top there. And what do they find? Aluminum and iron, the ingredients of unignited thermite. What is the signature of thermite doing in all the World Trade Center dust? Aluminum, iron, Fe is iron, Mg, manganese, which is added to thermate, as we mentioned. So this gets real interesting. They go, we got to look at this further. We're going to zoom in 50,000 times, and what are we going to see? Nano-sized particles of iron oxide crystals and aluminum platelets, 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair. Well, wait a minute. What is nanotechnology doing here? And why do we have aluminum and iron oxide, the ingredients of thermite, in what appears to be the same ratio of one to the other, 3/4 to 1/4, iron oxide to aluminum powder? Why is this set in a matrix of oxygen, silica, and carbon? And that is organic material, which is added to high energy explosives like TNT, RDX, to expand rapidly because they turn into gases and knock things over. That's how explosives work. Whereas incendiaries work by means of extreme heat. They burn things up. The military uses them to burn up equipment and make it unusable. So this is getting really interesting. They look in the peer-reviewed literature and they find, hey, this stuff's called super thermite. It was developed by Lawrence Livermore Lab before 2001. Pyrotechnic and explosive composites based on thermite reactions, whose fuel and oxidizer constituents are intimately mixed at the nanometer size scale. You see, when you get this stuff so small, the surface volume increases exponentially and you have an instantaneous chemical reaction. So, yeah, this is incredible stuff. In fact, the peer-reviewed literature showed that at about 850 degrees Fahrenheit, they ignite in a differential scanning calorimeter, a heater, which heats them up to the point where they ignite, and then they can measure the energy released, and you can see it's incredible energy release. Paint doesn't do this. So this is not paint. And that's exactly what the samples did, all of them, from the team of 8 international researchers from the World Trade Center dust, where those red gray chips are found. So they go, wow, this is fascinating. But then they didn't stop there. They noticed what happened when these red-gray chips ignited in the DSC. They produce molten iron microspheres with the same chemical signature as the molten iron microspheres found in the World Trade Center dust and documented by R.J. Lee and the U.S. Geological Survey. So we know exactly where all those 4 tons of previously molten iron microspheres came from. They came from these red-gray chips, as if we didn't know. They're found attached to partially ignited red-gray chips, as you see here and here. This is not made in a cave in Afghanistan. This is very sophisticated material made only in the most advanced defense contracting laboratories. So any real effort aimed at getting to the truth of what brought these towers down can easily find all this documented evidence in the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal, where they conclude the red layer is active unreacted thermitic material incorporating nanotechnology. It's a highly energetic pyrotechnic or explosive material. Wow. Excuse me. Turn your cell phones off, everybody. What do we have here? We have the 10 key characteristic features of controlled demolition. Fire and some very uncharacteristic features as well. Fire does not create any one of these features, let alone all of them. With additional circumstantial evidence, corroborative testimony, this becomes proof of controlled demolition, a body of proof that's convinced 3,600 architects and engineers to demand a new investigation, not only of Building 7, but all of that extreme heat applies to the Twin Towers as well. And so, yeah, we need a real investigation. And part of that effort has gone into co-producing the film series, 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom, an unprecedented film series taking the hard evidence of 9/11 crimes to court. Well, you can join us and co-produce this film series, and I think you're going to want to after you see the first 4 of 12 episodes. Here's just an introduction.
No matter how improbable the conclusion may appear, when you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
We're bringing alive in the film the 60 exhibits of the 9/11 WTC evidence contained in the Lawyers Committee grand jury petition that have already been submitted to the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan to present to a special criminal jury. This historic investigation is ongoing, and there's a role for you in it. Yes, you can help us bring the real perpetrators to justice. Through this film series, we're bringing together 24 experts in their fields.
They ignored any scenario involving incendiaries.
Demolition work, you're going to set charges on each floor.
The building could not have been brought down by office fires.
In other words, all of the interior columns over 8 stories came down. We're basically lost at once.
I could make out what looked like from a science fiction movie, molten lava, okay?
And he paused and said, that'll be coming down around 5 o'clock.
We'll be filming these evidence presentations, not only for our filings with the grand jury, also as presentations to each of you.
We're inviting you to serve as virtual grand jurors during each episode. And yes, do help us and co-produce this film series for $10. You can co-produce for a $500 donation. We'll have you listed as an executive producer on the film series. And so please join us with that level of support if you can. And watch all four episodes so far at 911c2c.org. That's 911c2c.org. Letter C, number 2, letter C.org. And ask yourself this. If Building 7 was a controlled demolition, part of the World Trade Center, came down on 9/11 in the afternoon, that necessarily complicates the analysis of the Twin Towers. At least we have to look for evidence of controlled demolition, see if it might be. Do we have any such evidence? Well, look at the two towers coming down simultaneously here in this paired view. Upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying structural steel sections weighing 4 and 8 tons, laterally ejected at 80 miles an hour, clocked by physicists, landing up to 600 feet in every direction, trailed by thick white smoke clouds. Why are all these structural steel sections trailing thick white smoke clouds? Steel is not flammable in office fire or jet fuel conditions. So what are we looking at here? Well, we can get a clue. Let's see what happens when you burn thermite. You not only have molten iron, but you have thick white smoke clouds of aluminum oxide ash, the other byproduct of thermite. That's the only rational explanation, especially given all the other evidence we're seeing. Speaking of which, let's look at the features of controlled demolition in the Twin Towers, starting with feature number 1. Is there a sudden onset of destruction? Well, it's standing at rest, and all of a sudden, it's in uniform downward motion. No jolt, no hesitation upon impact of the cold, hard steel below. Same with the South Tower. It's at rest, and all of a sudden, it's in uniform downward motion. No stoppage when it meets the incredible resistance below. We're told that the upper part drove the rest of the building down to the ground and then destroyed itself. Let's see if that's true. Watch the lower red line, which is the point of plane impacts. Is the upper part driving the rest of the building down to the ground, or is the upper part destroying itself? It's destroying itself. If it were there and destroying the building below, we'd see it. But none of the photos, none of the videos show an upper part destroying the lower part. If it were there, it would have destroyed these few remaining core columns standing 900 feet in the air for a dozen seconds. And then they're undermined by additional explosions as the steel falls through the smoke, leaving smoke in its path. And interestingly, what does it even look like? Does it even look like a collapse? Let's compare it to a known volcanic eruption. In fact, which one's the volcanic eruption? Which one is the South Tower? It's hard to tell, right? Upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying, solid, molten objects, trailed by thick, white smoke clouds. So what are we looking at? Are we looking at a collapse? Or are we looking at a massive series of explosions? We'll get more clues coming up here. But yeah, the volcanic eruption is on the right, in case you were wondering. And let's look at feature number 2, because if there were explosions, there will be witnesses of explosions. Are there any? Yeah, there's 156 of them. NIST says there were none. They claim to have interviewed over 100 first responders. They missed all of these, which were publicly available to them. on the website of the New York Times because the city was withholding this information at first from the public. But the New York Court State of Appeals overturned them in this FOIA lawsuit, Freedom of Information Act, and they were forced to turn it over. And 12,000 pages of testimony are on the New York Times website today. Graham McQueen read them all. He found 156 witnesses of explosions. Here they go. We felt the ground shake. You could see the tower sway, and then it just came down. Wait a minute. There's a specific order of events here. They're seeing something, they're feeling something, they're hearing something before the tower comes down. That's really important. Do you think that NIST thought that was important? Apparently not. All of a sudden, the ground just started shaking. Felt like a train running under my feet. The next thing we know, we look up and the tower is collapsing. Shook my bones. Shortly before the first tower came down, I remember feeling the ground shaking. I heard a terrible noise, and then debris just started flying everywhere. I saw a flash, flash, flash at the lower level of the building. You know, like when they demolish a building, saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. He saw about 6 of these brief flashes, accompanied by a crackling sound before the tower collapsed. I saw low-level flashes. I saw flash, flash, flash. And then it looked like the building came down. An explosion appeared at the very top simultaneously from all 4 sides. Material shot out horizontally. And then there seemed to be a momentary delay before you could see the beginning of the collapse. How specific does this fire chief, this expert witness, need to be? There was an explosion in the South Tower. When it hit about the 5th floor, I figured it was a bomb because it looked like a synchronized, deliberate kind of thing. Not one of those 156 witnesses, and I could read them all to you if you had time, are included in the NIST report. Do you think they're credible? Do you think they're important in this examination to try to find out what happened to this building? Let's look at feature number 3. Is there a straight down symmetrical collapse? Well, actually, the South Tower begins to tip over. So it's tipping over at 22 degrees. So we have asymmetrical loading on the structure below by this part that's falling off. We have asymmetrical damage from the fires, asymmetrical damage from the planes. How in the world then do we get complete symmetrical damage? Just like the firefighters said, all 4 sides of the building. Boom, 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 boom. And all the way down to the ground. We can get another clue by zooming in on the leading corner of these explosions. In this looped video, we see a dozen explosions up close and personal. These can only be explosions. They can only be the result of shaped cutter charges in the exterior of the World Trade Center North Tower. I think this is the North Tower. Or is this the South Tower? So if it's the same one, this one, is that the same one as that one? I don't even know. We'll find out. So are there any evidence of feature number 4? Is there isolated explosive ejections called squibs in the controlled demolition industry? Well, we see these isolated explosive ejections occurring 20 stories down, 40 stories down even, and there's no explanation for these in the official narrative whatsoever. And they occur as far down as 60 stories from the zone of destruction up above. Well, we can see at least a dozen of them on the left side of the South Tower as it begins to lean right. And in this looped video, what is happening here? They can only be explosives going off, in this case, simultaneously, almost. and destroying the rigidity of the structure above the point of plane impacts. So the building doesn't maintain its rigidity and roll off and maintain its angular momentum and roll off and hit the ground below. It actually then, after this, settles down into the building below. Well, how fast is that coming down? Physicists have clocked it, just like Building 7. Physics teacher David Chandler, and he says, he notes that it's coming down at 64% of the acceleration of gravity. This is not disputed. This is almost free fall acceleration. It's not slowing down. It's getting faster and faster and faster. Through what? Through 80,000 tons of structural steel. At the very bottom, almost solid steel, 52 inches by 22 inches. And that dimension at the top, but 2 inches thick. And I mean, in the middle of the building. At the top is the very lightest, only 5/8 inch thick steel up there. It's a virtual pyramid is what this building is structurally. We have 47 massive core columns in the core here, surrounded by 240 perimeter columns. Incredible structure, more steel than glass on the exterior of this building. It's very unusual building that way. How did it not even slow down that progression of what we're told was a gravitational collapse? And what happened to all of these structural steel sections? Well, let's look and see in feature number 7, a very unusual feature of controlled demolition, the lateral ejection of steel. Well, they're impaling themselves on skyscrapers all around the building, all around the World Trade Center, as far away as 600 feet, hitting the Winter Garden. These are 4 and 8 ton structural steel sections ejected at 80 miles an hour, clocked by physicists again, destroying the Deutsche Bank building. These exterior sections are bolted to the columns up above. You can see the bolt holes, 4 in each of the tops of these columns, and at the bottom, 4. All the plane had to do was punch this section through, shearing off those bolts, 5/8 inch round bolts. It didn't slice through the steel. And looking at these are freely flying structural steel sections, 4 and 8 ton sections, landing up to 600 feet. This one's about to hit Building 7. Wait a minute. Back, 2, forward, 2. What do you notice? Back, 2. It goes out. How does gravity work? Down. Here we have an incredible force of some kind forcing these 4-ton structural steel sections out and trailing what? Thick white smoke clouds. This can only be aluminum oxide ash, given all the other information we have, evidence of thermite. Steel is not flammable in office fire conditions. And so we have some force capable of firing a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles, and there's a lot of cannonballs that are being fired out of the World Trade Center towers explosively, creating a 1,200-foot diameter of debris. By the way, if 100,000 tons of structural steel is predominantly outside the footprint, then what's crushing the building? It can't crush the building if it's been distributed, as we've seen, up to 600 feet in every direction. This is 1/3 of the mass of this building. Well, maybe it was the concrete that crushed the building. Let's see, because we're looking for concrete. In fact, feature number 8, where did all that concrete go? There were 110 floors in each tower, each an acre in size, each composed of 4-inch and 8-inch thick concrete poured on metal decking, supported by lightweight steel trusses. We're looking for about 110 of these assemblies at the bottom. In a real gravitational collapse, we're looking for pancakes. What do we see at the bottom of World Trade Center North Tower? We don't see pancakes. We see a miscellaneous pile, maybe 3, 4, 5 stories tall. Well, where are all the pancakes? Here's a gravitational collapse. We have pancakes. This one was in Mexico due to an earthquake. Here's an earthquake that dropped a 33-story building, creating a lot higher pile than the World Trade Center North Tower, 110 floor building. So we have a building that's only a third of the height and yet leaving at least 3 times the height of a pile. Look at those guys in the lower right corner. We're talking about a 9-story pile here. That is pancakes. Where's all the concrete in the towers? Oh, there it is. Every photograph and video shows pulverized concrete in midair before it can develop its kinetic energy and crash on the ground and then pulverize. Well, by the way, if this building, if this concrete was pulverized, what could have done that? Well, explosives is one option, one cause. What's another cause? The ASTM C856, the American Society of Testing Materials report C856 documents that concrete can be powderized and as low a temperature of 1500 degrees Fahrenheit. I say low because we have 4,000 and 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. What can those temperatures produce? Well, the Fire Safety Journal agrees and suggests at 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit, half the temperatures that nanothermite get to, the concrete is completely decomposed. So we have a mechanism that could be responsible, 2 mechanisms, explosives and temperature, for the decomposition of this concrete. It's pulverized in midair. All the photos and videos show that. But then what happens to it? It's distributed laterally across lower Manhattan from river to river in a blanket 3 inches thick. Well, that made me think, if 90,000 tons of concrete in each tower is pulverized and spread over 3 square miles, it can't be crushing the building either. This is another third of the mass of this building. What's crushing the building? That's 2/3 the mass of the building that's not available to crush it. And yet NIST used all of that weight in their subcontracted theoretical model to Northwestern University in a peer-reviewed paper by Zdenek Bazant to crush that building. He figured this out in 2 days in a piece of mathematical wizardry that took engineers 10 years to decode it. And when they decoded it, they found out that not only did he use all of this mass to destroy the building below, but he doubled it. And he decreased the column strength below by a factor of 3. It was completely rigged in favor of a collapse, complete fraudulence. And yet, that's the key theoretical basis used today for NIST's column failure theory. It's complete fraud. And so we have the 8 key characteristic and some very uncharacteristic features of controlled demolition with the explosiveness. This is not one of these can be accounted for by fires. Not one of them, let alone all of them, with additional corroborative eyewitness testimony and other proof, circumstantial proof. This is proof of controlled demolition, a body of proof that has convinced 3,600 architects and engineers to demand a new investigation. And many of them appear in the film series that you're going to be looking at, 911c2c.org, where Mick Harrison of the Lawyers Committee and I, we partnered with the Lawyers Committee to bring this evidence to a grand jury. And we're filmed in the grand jury room speaking to our virtual stand-in grand jurors. And it is powerful. I encourage you to watch it. But you also have other documentaries which we've produced. A 9/11 explosive evidence experts speak out, where we've invited 40 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts, all laying out the evidence for you. We have a 15-minute documentary just on Building 7, narrated by actor Ed Asner. You can see these free on YouTube at our website, richardgage911.org. The building dynamic analysis by Professor Leroy Hulsey is documented in this 1-hour documentary by the filmmaker of 9/11, or Loose Change 9/11. That's Dylan Avery. So we have brochures that outline all of this evidence. This is our street brochure. You can download it for free on our website in the store and print it and hand it to every architect and engineer that you can find, everybody else that you know. Because we got to get to the truth about 9/11. For the reasons I told you at the beginning of this presentation. It's changed our society. We've lost our country. We're losing it fast. And there's very little time to save it. We're almost entered into a totalitarian nightmare. What are you going to do? Wait for the next 9/11? Well, I have news for you. It came and went twice already while some of you were sleeping. COVID over the last 4 years with a false disease and a false solution for that disease. We have 10/7 in Gaza, another false flag operation engineered to manipulate people so they could go in and depopulate Gaza, which is what's happening, of course, in the genocide. So what are you going to do? Stick your head in the sand and pretend you didn't hear this now? No, don't do that. Speak the truth. Stand up like Rashid and like the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, and join us. It's not too late to save our country. Thank you, guys.
No, thank you. Thank you for everything. We've got to have you back on the platform. You did an amazing, amazing job. And I knew you were going to do it because, like I said, I've been watching you since C-SPAN way back when. And I want to just give you your flowers right now and thank you for your deep investigation into the false flag operation of 9/11.
Well, thank you, Rashid. I'm honored. There's a lot more to talk about, and you can see it all, you guys, on the website. There's 5 hours of these presentations. I just condensed it for everybody today.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. You and your wife be blessed and be safe, and watch out, because you know they've killed a lot of people who were talking about explosives. A lot of the witnesses were killed, and this was left out. Like I believe a few of the people that you showed in the video, they were killed after saying that they heard explosions or whatever like that. So these people won't stop at anything because they don't treasure life. What they treasure is power, money, and domination at the expense of life.
Yeah, that's right. And we owe it to the 9/11 victims and their family members, the lost firefighters, all the people in those buildings, 3,000 of them, and 2 million people in Afghanistan and Iraq who have lost their lives in those invasions and the subsequent 9/11 wars, like in Syria, Lebanon, and the Sudan, and other areas, Libya, all of which were part of the 7 countries to be taken down in 5 years that General Wesley Clark learned about in the Pentagon and exposed just 2 weeks after 9/11. This happened. And he exposed this on Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman. And they came in with a policy to take out those countries when they came into power. And not just Afghanistan, of course, but Iraq as well. And Iran is the last one standing. And I'm very concerned that there'll be another false flag attack blamed on Iran so that we can manipulate our people to go to war for Israel in Iran.
Well, again, I say thank you so much for blessing us with your presence and blessing us with the information that you've blessed us with. A lot of us are going away from here much smarter on the situation that took place on 9/11 and the incidents that has taken place since 9/11. Thank you so much.
Oh, good point. You're so welcome, Rashid. It's my honor. Thank you.
Everybody hit the like button. And as I always say, do right by others, not because there's some material gain or some accolades to be had, but do right by others because it's the right, the humane, and the godly thing to do. Because even when no one else is watching you, remember, God Almighty is watching you. As my late mother would always say, he sits high, but he looks low. Know that I love each and every one of you who loves truth, but know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true. But above all things, remember this, to stay righteous. Hey, mama, your baby boy still loves you more than life. Thank you, everybody. Deuces, we're out of here. Peace.
Told you to walk away. That was my first and last mistake. I'm blue without your face. But what can I do? 'Cause I'm just a